The throne was empty. The Emperor lay broken, his scream fading into silence. And in that silence, Luke Skywalker did not throw away his weapon. He raised it. 8 seconds. That's all it would take for the galaxy's destiny to shatter. What if the hero who saved the rebellion, the boy from Tatooine who once gazed at twin suns, chose power instead of mercy? What if the son of Anakin Skywalker accepted the crown of darkness, not as a Sith, but as something far more dangerous? This is the story that was never told. The forbidden path whispered in shadows of the Force. A tale where victory over the Emperor does not bring freedom, but a new reign. Where hope itself becomes a weapon, and the galaxy kneels not before Palpatine, but before its savior turned sovereign. Imagine fleets bowing not in fear, but in awe. Imagine the Jedi reborn, not as guardians, but as enforcers of a single will. Imagine a brother and sister destined not to unite the galaxy, but to divide it forever. In this alternate timeline, the light does not fall to the dark, it claims it. And the galaxy must ask, when a Skywalker wears the crown, is it salvation or the beginning of the end? Imagine this, Luke Skywalker, the bright symbol of hope in Star Wars saga, standing not as a Jedi Knight, but as the Emperor of the galaxy. It feels almost impossible, right? After all, Luke is the farm boy who rejected the dark side, who refused to kill his father in anger, and who saved Anakin's soul in the end. But the what-if scenario opens a fascinating door. Under what circumstances could Luke realistically have risen to become Emperor? To explore this, we need to rewind to the emotional crossroads of Return of the Jedi. On the second Death Star, Palpatine tempts Luke with anger, rage, and the promise of ultimate power. What if in that moment, Luke had given in, instead of throwing his lightsaber aside? What if he struck down the Emperor and immediately seized the throne? The galaxy was already trembling under the collapse of the Empire. Vader was mortally wounded, and the Rebel Alliance was preparing for its final victory. In this alternate path, Luke could have crowned himself as the new ruler, justified not by greed, but by the idea that only he with Jedi abilities could bring true order. This pivot is what makes the thought experiment so powerful. Luke wouldn't have to be evil in the traditional sense. He could see himself as the solution, a benevolent dictator who believes the galaxy needs his control to end endless wars. Remember, Luke grew up during galactic chaos. The Clone Wars had left scars, the Empire brought decades of oppression, and the rebellion itself caused devastating conflict. A young man burdened with the weight of destiny might convince himself that taking power was the only way to prevent future suffering. There's also the psychological angle. Luke is deeply tied to his father's legacy. Knowing Anakin fell to the dark side, Luke constantly wrestled with the fear of repeating that fate. But in a twisted turn, what if Luke rationalized that by becoming Emperor, he wasn't falling like Anakin? He was correcting his father's mistakes? Instead of serving Palpatine, he would overthrow him. Instead of being consumed by the dark, he would use it for good. It's a classic temptation, believing you're strong enough to master darkness without being mastered yourself. The timing is another key factor. In the chaos after Palpatine's fall, the Empire had no clear heir. The military leaders would be scrambling for control, factions forming overnight. Luke, with his power and symbolic status, could quickly step into the void. Imagine Imperial admirals and governors pledging loyalty to him, either out of fear or admiration. At the same time, many rebels might reluctantly support him too, seeing him as a unifier in a broken galaxy. The perfect storm for Luke's rise was already there. The only missing ingredient was his choice. And here's the chilling question. Would Luke even notice the moment he crossed the line? History often shows leaders don't wake up and declare, "I'll be a tyrant today." They start with good intentions, then slowly compromise. Luke's road to Emperor could begin not with cruelty, but with conviction. One of the most compelling aspects of imagining Luke as Emperor is the tension between the Jedi philosophy he was raised with and the seductive grip of absolute power. The Jedi Code teaches discipline, detachment, and selflessness. But being Emperor requires the opposite. It demands control, dominance, and sometimes brutal decisiveness. Could Luke balance the two, or would the throne inevitably corrupt him? Let's break it down. The Jedi are taught to avoid attachments because strong emotions, love, fear, anger, can lead to the dark side. But Luke's entire journey has been driven by attachment. He risks everything for his friends, refuses to abandon Leia, and even confronts Vader out of loyalty to family. If Emperor Luke tried to rule by the Jedi Code, he would quickly find it impossible. Leaders must make personal sacrifices, choose who lives and who dies in conflicts, and sometimes abandon loved ones for the greater good. Would Luke truly be able to issue an order that sacrificed Leia, Han, or thousands of innocent civilians? That conflict alone could crack the Jedi discipline he worked so hard to master. Now consider the flip side, Luke abandoning the Jedi Code altogether. Imagine him reasoning that the code was flawed, that it blinded the Jedi during the Clone Wars and led to their downfall. With this mindset, Emperor Luke could craft his own hybrid philosophy, a new Jedi Order built around pragmatic power rather than strict detachment. He might argue that emotions, even anger, can be useful tools if wielded responsibly. In his eyes, he wouldn't be betraying the Jedi, he would be evolving them. But here's the catch. Absolute power doesn't wait for careful reflection. Once Luke controls fleets, armies, planets, every decision has galactic consequences. Would he order mass arrests to keep peace? Would he silence rebellion for stability? Would he build new superweapons, but claim they're only for defense? Each step could be justified, each compromise rationalized, until he wakes up as the very thing he once swore to destroy. The irony is striking. As a Jedi, Luke fought tirelessly against tyranny. Yet, as Emperor, even with noble intentions, he could become trapped in the same cycle. History in Star Wars shows us this pattern. The Republic turned into the Empire because leaders believed control was necessary for order. Luke might fall into the same trap, convinced he's the exception, but ultimately repeating history. And let's not forget the Force itself. The dark side feeds on domination and control. Even if Luke resisted outright corruption, the very act of ruling through fear or unchecked authority could gradually open him to the dark side. In fact, the more he clung to power, the more vulnerable he'd become. That slow erosion of Jedi ideals is where the real danger lies. Not in one dramatic fall, but in 1,000 small choices. Picture it. The war is over, Palpatine is gone, Vader is dead, and Luke Skywalker now sits on the Imperial throne. At first glance, the galaxy might breathe a sigh of relief. After all, Luke is not a faceless tyrant like Palpatine. He's a hero of the rebellion, someone who fought for freedom and justice. Many worlds could initially welcome his rule, believing a Jedi Emperor would finally bring stability after decades of war. But what would that stability actually look like? Let's start with the political landscape. Under Emperor Luke, the Empire wouldn't dissolve, it would transform. Instead of ruling through fear alone, Luke could restructure it into what he might call a protectorate. Imagine a government that still keeps Imperial fleets patrolling the stars, but now they're guardians of peace instead of enforcers of oppression. That branding would be powerful. Planets tired of chaos would likely support it, trusting Luke as a fair leader. The propaganda machine could paint him as the savior who defeated both Vader and Palpatine, elevating his image to near-mythic status. But here's the problem. Maintaining galactic order requires compromise. Would Luke allow worlds to secede, or force them back into the fold for unity? Would he tolerate dissenting voices in the Senate, or silence them to preserve efficiency? Every decision would shape whether his empire leaned toward benevolence, or slipped into the same iron grip as Palpatine's. Even with Luke's best intentions, running a galaxy of trillions requires harsh choices, and those choices could harden him into the very dictator he sought to avoid. Now let's talk about the Jedi. As Emperor, Luke would likely rebuild the Order in his image. Instead of scattered knights serving the Force above politics, they could become agents of the throne, peacekeepers who double as enforcers of the throne. Think about how terrifying that could be. Jedi not as independent guardians, but as extensions of a galactic ruler. To the public, it might seem like security, but to those who resist, it would feel like tyranny cloaked in robes of light. The line between Jedi Knight and Imperial Inquisitor would blur frighteningly fast. On the economic and social side, Emperor Luke could push reforms, ending slavery in the Outer Rim, protecting smaller systems from exploitation, and redistributing resources hoarded by corrupt officials. These actions would win him loyalty, but they'd also create enemies among powerful elites. Corporate giants, crime syndicates, and even old Imperial loyalists would see him as a threat to their interests. That tension could drive constant conflict, forcing Luke to tighten control even more. And what about the people themselves? Citizens of the core worlds might adore him, convinced they're safer than ever. But in the Outer Rim, where freedom is prized and Imperial oppression hit hardest, resentment could fester. Whole sectors might view Luke as just another emperor, no different than Palpatine, no matter how noble his intentions. Rebellion could rise again, not against Sith domination, but against the suffocating order of a Jedi-led empire. Here's the real twist. Luke's rule might not look evil on the surface. For years, he could maintain peace, prosperity, and unity. But the cracks would grow slowly, hidden beneath the illusion of balance. And when they finally split open, the galaxy might face a conflict even worse than before. Because this time, the tyrant in charge would be a Skywalker beloved by millions. So who would stand against an Emperor Luke? Would his allies follow him? Or would betrayal spark from within his closest circle? That's where things get dark. If Luke Skywalker rose to the throne as Emperor, his story wouldn't play out in isolation. Every hero, every villain, every faction in the galaxy would be forced to respond. Some would fall in line, others would resist, and a few might betray him outright. This is where the alternate timeline gets really juicy, because the people closest to Luke would determine whether his empire stood strong or crumbled from within. Let's start with Leia Organa. In the canon timeline, she dedicates her life to the cause of democracy and freedom. If Luke became emperor, Leia would face an impossible dilemma: support her brother or resist him. At first, she might trust his intentions, believing he truly wanted to bring peace. But the moment she sensed echoes of tyranny, Leia would likely oppose him with the same fire she showed against Palpatine. And here's the devastating twist. Luke and Leia are siblings, bound not only by blood but by the Force. A confrontation between them could fracture the galaxy even more violently than the original Galactic Civil War. Imagine a Skywalker Civil War, where brother and sister stand on opposite sides of the throne. Han Solo would be another key player. Han is skeptical of authority in any form. He fought against the Empire not just for Leia, but because he despised tyranny. Would he trust Luke as Emperor? Probably not for long. Han's loyalty lies with Leia, so if she turned against her brother, Han would stand right beside her. His roguish charm and influence among smugglers, pirates, and independent systems could create a powerful resistance against Luke's empire. Now let's consider the old Rebel Alliance leadership: Mon Mothma, Admiral Akbar, and the others. Their entire fight was about restoring democracy, not replacing one emperor with another. Even if Luke promised a just and noble rule, many of them would see him as betraying the rebellion's core ideals. Some might reluctantly back him for stability, but others would plot against him, setting the stage for political intrigue and covert resistance. And then there are the remnants of the Empire. Strange as it sounds, many Imperial officers might embrace Luke as their new emperor. He carries the Skywalker name. He's a powerful Force user, and he could unify the fractured military under his command. But loyalty among Imperials is always fragile. If Luke tried to reform their system, cracking down on corruption or abuse, those same admirals and moffs might turn against him. Assassination attempts, coups, and secret alliances could emerge from within his own ranks. The galaxy's underworld would also play a huge role. Syndicates like the Hutts, Crimson Dawn, and Black Sun thrived in chaos. Emperor Luke's vision of order would threaten their profits. These groups could secretly fund rebellions, stir unrest, and sabotage his empire from the shadows. But perhaps the most haunting betrayal could come from within the Jedi themselves, assuming Luke rebuilt the Order. Imagine a student who followed him with devotion, only to see through the cracks in his rule. A young Jedi rising up against their master, mirroring the tragedy of Anakin and Obi-Wan, would be an echo of history Luke might not escape. In this dark timeline, Luke's greatest strength, his relationships, would also be his greatest weakness. Allies turning into enemies, family becoming opposition, loyal followers becoming betrayers. The galaxy wouldn't just test Luke's power, it would test his heart. And that brings us to the ultimate question. Even if Emperor Luke conquered all challenges, would the Force itself allow such a balance of light and dark to exist? The concept of balance in the Force has always been at the heart of Star Wars. Prophecies spoke of the Chosen One restoring balance. The Jedi fought to maintain it, and the Sith sought to bend it toward darkness. But if Luke became Emperor, the entire question of balance would be flipped upside down. Could the Force truly remain balanced with one man holding such immense power over both the spiritual and political destiny of the galaxy? First, let's remember what balance really means. Many fans interpret it differently. To the Jedi, balance often meant the dominance of the light side, with the dark side suppressed or destroyed. To others, balance means coexistence, light and dark kept in check, neither overwhelming the other. Emperor Luke would disrupt both interpretations. By combining Jedi ideals with the authority of an emperor, he'd create a hybrid system where one person decided what the Force's balance should look like. That's not harmony, it's control. The danger is that the Force itself might resist. We've seen how the Force responds throughout the saga. When the Sith grew too powerful, the Chosen One was born. When darkness rose, new light emerged. If Luke tipped the scales by monopolizing power, the Force could react by raising new champions to oppose him. Perhaps a rival Jedi, a reborn Sith, or even his own sister Leia stepping fully into her Force potential. Balance doesn't allow a single will to dominate forever. Here's the deeper tragedy. Luke might genuinely believe he's maintaining balance. He could argue that by ruling as Emperor, he prevents chaos, keeps the dark side at bay, and enforces peace across the stars. But balance in the Force isn't about order, it's about flow. Suppressing dissent, silencing emotions, or bending the galaxy to his vision would create imbalance, no matter how noble his reasons. In the long run, the Force would correct that imbalance, even if it meant destroying Luke's empire from within. We also can't ignore Luke's lineage. As the son of Anakin Skywalker, he carries both immense light and immense dark within him. In canon, Luke resists the temptation of power by letting go of anger and embracing compassion. But in this alternate path, Emperor Luke would constantly walk a razor's edge. Every choice to maintain control, every compromise, every act of force, would feed the shadow of his father. Slowly, inevitably, balance would tilt toward darkness. And yet, there's a poetic possibility here. What if Emperor Luke was the balance? Not purely light, not fully dark, but a ruler embodying both sides of the Force at once. A gray emperor who wielded compassion and fear, justice and control in equal measure. Could that be balance? Or would it just be another illusion, masking tyranny behind a different philosophy? Ultimately, the what if of Emperor Luke leaves us with a chilling conclusion. Balance in the Force isn't meant to rest in the hands of one person. It's a cycle, a struggle, a living current that shapes and reshapes the galaxy through countless lives. If Luke tried to hold it all, the Force would find a way to break free, whether through rebellion, betrayal, or the rise of new heroes. And maybe that's the beauty of this thought experiment. Luke as Emperor isn't just a dark twist. It's a reminder of why he chose differently in the films. Because true balance comes not from control, but from letting go.